Hey everyone, it's Mike from Voluntary Virtues Network. Hope you guys are having a wonderful day. It is Monday. It's a Monday, 3 to 4 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. Usually is when we do these, but we had a conflict of schedules, so we went ahead and pushed up the Dr. Walter Block interview to 11 a.m. this morning. But it is live, and hopefully, I'm not going to keep them hopefully for the next hour, but I do got a variety of great viewer questions that I had to bounce off of him. If you do want to see Dr. Walter Block down the road on Voluntary Virtues Network, he's here every first Monday of the month, usually 3 to 4 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. Now, for those of you who are wondering who is Dr. Walter Block, or maybe you want some more research or to do more research on exactly who he is, you can go ahead and click on the archived version of this video right here and here, and you'll go to some of our old videos. Explains a little bit more of where he came from as a voluntarist. I'll even put one of the videos up that's a story of how he got to voluntarism, which he has told on a variety of networks, but I think really nailed it on about a year ago when he was on here and talked about it then. Anyway, really great stuff. I would highly encourage anybody to go check out Dr. Walter Block's stuff. As always, Google Walter Block and Voluntary Virtues, or just Walter Block in general, and find a bunch of great information. Now, that being said, I don't want to take 30 minutes talking about how he got to voluntarism again. Obviously, we've already been on all those questions, so we're going to jump right into the deep end today. First of all, Walter Block, how are you doing today? Pretty good?
I'm doing pretty well. It's always a pleasure to be with you. Thanks again for having me.
Oh, definitely. Always a pleasure to have you on the show. The first question today comes from Jared Williams. He wants me to ask him to supply a logical proof that the individual exists. How do you prove individualism to people?
Wow. That's prove that an individual exists? Well, I guess one way, what was it? Descartes said, cogito ergo sum, I think, therefore I am. I fill out this T-shirt, therefore I am. I don't know. You can see me on the monitor. That proves that I am. I'm not sure I understand that question. Maybe it's too philosophical for me. I'm just a poor economist, theorist. I think I exist. I'm pretty sure I exist. If I don't exist, I guess I don't have any problems. But I have problems. Problem ito ergo sum. I don't know. I'm not sure. I'm not sure what to say about that. It's sort of like asking, is 2 + 2 = 4? How do you prove it? I guess a mathematician could probably prove it. I don't know that I can, and I'm not sure.
The only way the mathematician could actually prove it, in my opinion, is to back check. How do you prove the proof? It's like a theory because it hasn't been debunked yet, right? 2 + 2 has never been and never will be debunked, so that's why we know it's a legitimate theory, right? It's using deductive reasoning, but how do you prove deductive reasoning? It's really hard, isn't it?
Well, you have to start with deductive reasoning. You have to start with the law of non-contradiction, because if you contradict yourself, you really can't even speak. So if you're going to speak, you have to not contradict yourself. But maybe we're misinterpreting the question, because he says one way to interpret the question is, how do you prove that an individual exists? Another way to interpret that is, how do you prove that individualism, a different word, ism stuck after individual, how do you prove that that exists? And there are two kinds of individualism. There's methodological individualism, and then there's, I guess, ethical individualism. And methodological individualism, I'm a professor, and if I don't understand a question, what I do is I convert it into a question that I do understand and answer that, and I'm not sure if I'm doing justice to it, but I'm trying. Methodological individualism is one of the bulwarks of Austrian economics, and I certainly support that. And what it means is that there is no such thing as a group apart from the individuals comprising it. So when you say a group of people did something, what you're really doing is shorthand. Instead of saying, Joe and Pete and Harry and Sally did something, you're saying this group did something. So there's nothing more to the group than the individuals comprising it. There's no such thing as society other than the individual that comprise it. So I think that would be methodological individualism. Now, here on the other issue of individualism versus collectivism, here I have a view that is very different than most libertarians. I'm not an individualist here. I'm just as much a collectivist as I am an individualist. And, a lot of people, even Murray Rothbard and Ayn Rand and people I admire greatly, were always criticizing collectivism. But to me, if the collectivism is voluntary, then that's okay. And there's nothing better about individualism than collectivism in ethics. For example, if you're an individualist, then you must favor individual sports like, I don't know, swimming or track or something like that, shot put. Whereas if you're a collectivist, you favor team sports like baseball or football or soccer or whatever. Individualists would favor singles tennis and collectivist doubles tennis. Well, as a libertarian, I have no views on that. I don't think it's a relevant issue whether we should favor team sports or individual sports. So I take somewhat of a different view. For me, the word collectivism is not necessarily a curse word, whereas it is for many libertarians, because if the collectivism is voluntary, as in a team or in an orchestra with 100 musicians, that's a collective. The kibbutz is a collective. The monastery, the family is a collective. So I hope I've done justice to this question. I don't think I have, but I'm trying.
No, I think you have, and I think a marriage is a perfect example of a voluntary collective because you're free to leave the collective. I think it's, are you free to enter and leave the collective? And that's really the important thing here. With statism, unfortunately, you're not free to leave the collective. You're obviously forced. Not only do you voluntarily join, they force you to opt in naturally, right, into the state by birth, and then you have no option of opting out. So this is why I like to call the state involuntary or forced collectivism, right? That's what I like to call it. So
we're not against the collectivism, we're against the coercion of it.
Right. We're not against teamwork. We're not against working together. We're not against pulling capital, right? Some people are like, well, in your free society, Howard, but you're not going to have a private property structure for people to take their investments and pool them together. I'm like, that's ridiculous. Free society would allow that, right? So anyway, no, I think you did pretty good on that answer. I'll
be my
if Jared Williams wants to give us an Indian burn later on, he will. He'll twist us our arms later on. So thank you for that question, Jared. Let's move on. Actually, you know what? I think there's another question here that actually matches up with this one. Let me see if there it is. Susan Pollock Topowski, she wants me to ask you. She says it's a simple question, but I don't know. I think it's going to be pretty in-depth. Small L libertarians versus voluntarist versus anarchist. Is there a difference between all these terms that you see, and how do they affect and how are they affected by the Austrian economics?
Well, what were the words again? Small L libertarian.
Small L libertarian, voluntarist, and anarchist.
Well, to me, anarchists and voluntarists are synonyms. You have complete adherence to the non-aggression principle, and the only interaction between people is voluntary, and that's certainly the voluntarist position, and it's also the free market anarchist position as opposed to the left-wing anarchist position, which is very different. Mm-hmm. But libertarian, I think, is a little different because I'm a sort of a big tent kind of guy. I include among libertarians people like Ron Paul, who is not an anarchist. I include Ayn Rand as a libertarian, even though she wouldn't call herself that. She called herself an objectivist, but pretty much, as far as I'm concerned, she was a libertarian, although she's a little weak on foreign policy, but what the heck. But I think that there are 3 or 4 levels of libertarianism, and the highest level would be the libertarian anarchist, which would be the same as a voluntarist. The second would be this minarchist, limited government libertarian, where you believe that there should be a government, which I think is a problem, but the government should be limited to protecting person and property, and to that end it should only have 3 institutions: armies to keep foreign bad guys off of us, not to go around exporting democracy, but just to defend, and police to keep local bad guys off of us, not to have victimless crimes or put people in jail for drugs or prostitution or stuff. And third, courts. to determine who's the good guy and who the bad guy is. And I would include people like that as libertarians, and I would certainly include someone like Ron Paul, who is a constitutionalist libertarian. Andrew Napolitano might fit into that category. So, and I would even include in my more generous days classical liberals like Milton Friedman and Friedrich Hayek, who had a lot of deviations from the non-aggression principle, but still, were pretty darn good on many, many issues, even if not on all issues. So
I just want to jump in before you move on that topic real quick, while we're on the Constitution real quick. I just wanted to point out that most anarcho-capitalists that I know, a lot of them don't like the Constitution, but it's not because it was really necessarily a state document per se. It's because it allows for the infringement of individual freedom. That it allows theft, it allows regulations. It just opened up, regulation on commerce. Well, what the hell is that? Well, it looks like it's just about everything, right? So they limited it to all of these vast amounts of power. And so that's one of the problems we still have with it, is that it didn't hold down government enough, let alone allowed for government. So I think even Hoppian perspective says you can have a constitution, just make sure it's extremely voluntarist to where it says no theft allowed, and that pretty much summarizes almost all the other problems we have. Do you agree?
Well, yeah, I certainly agree. The Constitution violates the non-aggression principle in many, many ways, and therefore we would reject it. But the question is, do we consider a person like Ron Paul a libertarian? And if he's not a libertarian, I don't know. We're misusing the word. He's sort of like the best libertarian ever in terms of converting more people to libertarianism, with a possible exception of Ayn Rand. I'm not sure about that. But even the minarchists violate the non-aggression principle by having a government, and the government necessarily uses coercion to tax people and to prevent competition with itself. So when I'm using the word libertarian, maybe in a promiscuous way, by I should only allow libertarians who are anarchists, but then I think that what I'm doing is creating a definition. I'm trying to be repertorial here. I'm trying to report how the word is used. And people consider Friedman and Hayek at the fourth lowest or the lowest level as libertarians. People consider Ron Paul at the third lowest level as libertarians. People would consider Ayn Rand and I guess Robert Nozick as libertarians, even though they don't strictly adhere to the non-aggression principle. We can't all be Murray Rothbards and Hans Hoppies. So I think to answer the question, I see voluntarist and anarchist as synonyms, and I see libertarianism as including that, but is including more also.
Hey, fair enough. While we're on the topic of taxation, too, the first person to go ahead and leave a comment stating they want this, or go ahead and we'll allow for some competition here. Go ahead and put your name down in the comments section, and one of you will win some bumper stickers from Non-Aggression Apparel. So, good stuff. Thank you so much. And I agree with what you're saying, Dr. Walter. Excuse me. So let's move on to the next question, because I don't want to hold you too long today, but we do have some really great questions. We have to get through these. I think the next one we should go with is, yes, this is a good one right here. Jeff Peterson wants me to ask you, left anarchists would argue that the economic calculation problem does not apply to anarcho-socialism, anarcho-syndicalism, and anarcho-communism due to the ECP only applying to command and centrally planned economies. The economic.
I didn't get what ECP is.
Yeah, economic calculation problem.
Ah, sorry. Okay.
Yeah, no problem. So he says that left anarchists say that it doesn't apply to them because it only applies to command or centrally planned economies. Can you expand on why the ECP would apply to left anarchism as well as a state system?
Well, Murray Rothbard answers that, and he says not only would it apply to voluntary socialism, which I favor, it would even apply in capitalism, and he calls it the problem of, I forget what it's called, something like the one big corporation or the one big company or the one big firm. Suppose that, I don't know, Microsoft and McDonald's merged, and then they merged with Burger King and the three big auto companies, and all the companies merged, and now we just had one company. What Murray says is that we would have the socialist calculation, well, the capitalist calculation problem here, to coin a phrase. namely that if one entity, whether it's a voluntary entity as in socialism or this mass merger or coercive socialism, uh, there would be no market for production goods, no market for resources, no market for oil or anything, because only one company owns the entire structure of production. And Murray says that this would be inefficient, and we'd have economic calculation problems because we wouldn't really have a price system. So what Murray would say is that as this company, this one big firm, got bigger and bigger and bigger, it would have more and more inefficiency, and other firms would outcompete it. Now, look,
Diseconomies of scale, right? Diseconomies of scale.
that would be a very good way to put it. Diseconomies of scale. If you get too big, too bloated, and you have only one company running everything in the entire world, it would be inefficient. And I think Murray makes a very brilliant point there. Now, to get back to a hippie commune or a kibbutz or something like that, if it's small, there's no calculation problem. I mean, for Mises, the socialist calculation problem is if one company, or rather one nation or one government owns all capital goods. But if you have some small hippie commune out there somewhere, they're I think the analogy is like buttermilk. They're like a little clot of milk in the buttermilk. The milk part would be the free market system, and the commune would be just like a small firm, and there would be no calculation problem there. So here we have symmetry. We're not attacking socialism any more than we are. That is, we're not attacking or criticizing voluntary socialism any more than we are criticizing voluntary capitalism. If you get too big, whether voluntary socialism or capitalism, it's inefficient. So you have to distinguish between normative and positive. The normative is it voluntary? And a voluntary socialism is just as voluntary as a voluntary capitalism. So on ethical terms, they're fine. And
but without the pricing mechanism, without prices, how would the commune? You see, that's where the calculation comes from. Is this prices? Why wouldn't you have the economic calculation problem if you have no prices?
Right, you would have no market prices because there's only one firm or only one commune, voluntary commune, whereas you need market prices to indicate scarcities and desires of goods. So this is the economic calculation problem, ECP. I've never heard it said before. That's a great way to say it. And this would apply to a gigantic commune and to a gigantic amalgamation of voluntary firms.
Now that's the question, though. Would a company, if we really have an open and free society, a truly capitalist world, is it really possible for one firm to have no competition whatsoever? Out of 7 billion people, you'd think that somebody would be able to pop up for a new car company or something. You see what I'm getting at here? It's pretty unlikely. Doesn't the state usually oligopolize industry more than the free market?
Well, we're talking very hypothetical situations where you had this mass merger of all companies in the world just somehow merged. I mean, the antitrust people wouldn't much like that, but antitrust is a little incompatible with economic freedom as well,
right? And
also with efficiency. In other words, what you have here is a market antitrust, in effect, namely, the bigger they are, the harder they fall, or something like that. If you get too big for your britches, or as you said, the economies of scale turn negative. Even Hayek's information problems would come about here. If you really had one firm composed of 7 billion people, well, how would the president tell people to do things? I mean, it's just so preposterous that it would only interest theoretical considerations.
Hey, fair enough. A great answer. All right, let's go to let's do a little foreign policy here. John Baird wants me to ask you, first of all. He says your ideas of handling the current situation of 50 to 60,000 kids on the border. I'm not sure what he means by that. Do you know what he's talking about?
Yes.
What's going on?
Kids from Costa Rica and Ecuador going up through Mexico.
Gotcha.
and landing in Arizona or Texas or places like that, maybe New Mexico. And what should we do? And here we have the open borders problem. And let me just say that.
Just sorry to interrupt you. It sounds more like it's a problem that the rest of the world has statism than we might have some freedom policy like open borders. You see what I'm saying? They're fleeing statism. They would never have to flee if it wasn't for the other states sucking so bad.
Well, we have statism too, but our statism is better in
Right.
some sense than the statism that goes on in Mexico,
Honduras, yeah.
Honduras, Ecuador, South America, Central America, as shown by the people who are voting with their feet. You don't find kids from Idaho trying to get into Mexico or into Honduras. You find kids from Honduras trying to get into Idaho. So in some sense, the U.S. government is freer than those governments, and I think you're quite right when you say that they're fleeing statism. Not that they're getting non-statism, but they're getting better statism or less intrusive.
Less statism, which is better, yeah, agreed.
You know, the American system is better, is proved by the fact that you have this migration. Look, there were no Jews trying to get into Nazi Germany. They were trying to get out of Nazi Germany, which shows that Nazi Germany wasn't good for Jews. But now you get into the question, well, what should our position be? Should it be open borders, or should we obey the law? And the law would be that we only accept a certain number of people, immigrants, and they have to wait their turn. Before I answer it, I just wanted to say that there are certain issues that within the libertarian movement are very, very divisive. One of them is open borders, because you have people like me who favors totally open borders. There shouldn't be any borders, period. And on the other hand, you have people like, I don't know, Ron Paul and Murray Rothbard and Hans Hoppe who would say that that's nuts, and we shouldn't have that. So whenever you have an issue, when you have leading libertarians taking opposite points of view, you have to say this is sort of an undetermined area. Another one would be abortion. You have Ron Paul, who is pro-life, and Murray Rothbard, who is pro-choice. So what I say when I deal with issues like this is, if leading libertarians disagree on something, well, then anyone else who takes one or the other side, you can't say that they're not a libertarian. Okay, having given that preface, let me now say my own view is open borders. The Mexicans should come here if they want to come here, the people from Honduras, the people from Africa, Asia, Mars, if there are Martians, they can come here too, as far as I'm concerned. And there shouldn't be any border patrol people asking them anything. There should be no passports. You know, passports were, I don't know, 150 years ago they started. Before that, what a passport was sort of a note from the king or the president saying, you know, Joe Blow is a good guy, be nice to him, or something like that. It wasn't that you had to have one in order to get out of the country or into another country. And I think we ought to turn back the clock and go back to that.
Wasn't it after the Chinese Exclusion Act?
I'm sorry?
Wasn't it after they created them after the Chinese Exclusion Act?
I'm not a historian. I don't know the exact dates, but that sounds roughly correct. Now, the obvious argument against this is, well, you know, these people are coming here, they'll take advantage of the welfare system, they'll overrun the welfare system. Well, that's one argument against that, and my view on that is, well, let's get rid of the welfare system. The welfare system is anti-libertarian, and most of these people aren't coming here to take advantage of the welfare system. They're coming here because they have a freer situation, and they can get a job here more easily than in other countries, even though we have an unemployment rate that's too high. But then the question is, well, suppose 500 million Chinese come, or 500 million Indians, or 500 million Africans, or 500 million, I don't know, Martians come here. Won't the country be overcrowded? And my answer to that is twofold. First of all, the country is empty. If you get in an airplane and at night where you can see the lights, west of the Mississippi, there's nobody there. I mean, okay, there's Denver and there's San Francisco and LA, but that's about it. There's nobody out there. It's just vast areas of total blackness where there are no lights. And even east of the Mississippi, you know, you see a bunch of lights here and a bunch of lights there, but the place is empty. Thomas Sowell says that if you take all 7 billion people, you can put them in Texas, in the form of a 2-family house or a 1-family house with a front yard and a backyard and 2,500 square feet house, which sort of gives you an indication of how empty the place is. So I think we've got room for 1 billion people in the continental U.S., even forgetting about Alaska, which is, I don't know, 1/4 of the size of the country, of the other 49 states. But if you're really worried about that, I have a second opinion, if that didn't convince you. What I would say is, you see what Hans Hoppe says, he divides, and Murray Rothbard, what they say is, there are 3 crossings of international borders. First of all, there's trade. Whether we buy bananas or we trade bananas for maple syrup or whatever. And in that case, you have to have a willing buyer and a willing seller. And that's good. And the second one is investment. If somebody wants to invest in America, like say the Japanese at one time bought up Rockefeller Center, well, there was a willing seller, Rockefeller Center owners, and a willing buyer, and again, you have mutual agreement. And what Hans and Murray say is, but when you have immigration, you have something different. You have just unilateralism. You have one guy picking himself up and moving to the U.S., and it's very different there, and what they say is this is trespass. And my answer to that is, okay, well, you got a point there. What we got to do is privatize every square inch of the United States. Mm-hmm. Privatize the national parks and the city parks and the roads and the streets and the rivers and the lakes and everything. And when we privatize everything, then Hans and Murray are correct. Then I'll be a closed border person, in effect, because then any immigrant who comes here without a by or leave of the owner of the land is a trespasser. So we wouldn't. We're not against immigrants. We're against trespassers.
And we all know the cost of excluding would not be. It would be higher than the cost of, in most cases, of letting them come. Right. So in other words, most people that are stopped now, that they can just subsidize the cost of border patrol onto the state, they wouldn't have that cost there. They'd actually have to start writing the check themselves. I'm guessing most of those border patrol checks would not be flowing in to the state anymore. Right.
Right. Well, now, if somebody immigrated, they'd have to have the permission of the landowner, and namely, it would be like an investment or a trade. And I think that there's coherence there. But right now, suppose some guy from North Korea takes a helicopter and lands in the middle of, I don't know, Montana, in some place where the U.S. government, the BLM, the Bureau of Land Management, owns some land that they never homesteaded. And this guy is the first homesteader. And what crime did he commit? In other words, we have to keep our eyeglasses, our non-aggression principle eyeglasses, firmly affixed, and we have to say of anything, if we want to see if it's guilty or not, does he violate the non-aggression principle? So here's a guy from North Korea who gets into a cannon, and they shoot the cannon. They shoot him over to the middle of, I don't know, Nevada somewhere, and now he starts farming this empty land. Did he violate the non-aggression principle? Well, I can't see how he did, and therefore I think that he should be allowed to, or he shouldn't be put in jail for sneaking past the border and going and being shot out of this cannon. I'm being a little silly here, but yeah. So that would be my solution if you're worried about inundation of millions or billions of Chinese or Indians or Africans or whoever. Privatize everything, and then there'll be no more immigration. There'll be just immigration defined as unilateral. Now there'll be mutual things, namely the owner of the property will have to agree to have somebody come in, be his tenant or sell land or whatever.
I completely agree. All right, no, great answer. Let's go ahead. Oh, so what would you do now with those kids? Basically, just let them into Utah, huh, or whatever.
Wherever.
Wherever. Yeah. As long as they're not infringing. The thing is, technically, my neighbor or I should be able to go to where the BLM says they own the land, or really they're just possessing it.
There's this guy Cliven Bundy who has some land in near Nevada, Las Vegas, and he's been homesteading that land for many generations, and with cows, which is okay. And the BLM wants to charge him for it. Why should the BLM charge him for him? It's his land. He's the rightful owner of it. And what right does the BLM have to any of this land? I mean, the U.S. government owns, what, 50 or 60% of all the land west of Mississippi? They never homesteaded any of that. They shouldn't own it.
Yeah, I think I'm going to start taxing the federal government. That's what I'm going to do.
Yeah, see, we're moderates. We're not against taxes.
Yeah, we'll tax
you.
You.
Government, right?
I know what I'm going to say to them. We'll make it fair. Anything that they take from me is the tax. So whatever they only owe tax to me what they take from me in the first place. Maybe some restitution too. Anyway,
libertarians for taxation. That's magnificent.
Oh, don't get me in trouble here. All right, so. I'm loving this. All right, so let's move on to the next question. Great answer there, Walter. Thank you so much. So while we're still with John Baird, he wants me to ask you one more question is, what are effective soft power strategies for dealing with ISIS in Iraq?
Well, I don't think we should deal with ISIS in Iraq. I mean, we and Lou Rockwell is always telling me I shouldn't say we, they, the government. We're not the government, it's them. The U.S. government should, if it exists at all, and now we're not in anarchy, we're in limited government minarchism, minimal government. And what the minimal government should do is protect us from foreign aggressors. And ISIS isn't attacking us. They don't have the rowboats to get over here. And if they did, we should have a very strong Coast Guard. And if any of those guys want to come over here and impose the caliphate on us, well, then, blow them out of the water. But they're not doing that. They're just trying to have Kurdistan or the caliphate or whatever it is. And, the borders in those areas were drawn up by British people, French people, American people, other colonial powers, and let them sort it out themselves. They
sounds like a secessionist movement to me, really.
Well, yes, the Kurds want to secede from Syria and also Turkey, and they want to have Kurdistan, and I don't see why they shouldn't. And the Arabs groups want to, the Sunnis and the Shiites want to have separate countries. I don't see why they shouldn't. I mean, what's so holy about Iraq that Iraq has to be inviolable? We must have Iraq the way it is.
For the Union of Iraq.
Oh, okay, you've convinced me. Now I see your point. Yes, the government should go in there and make sure that those guys adhere to what we want, because we have interests there. I mean, we have interests everywhere. Again, I'm talking about we. The U.S. government has these great interests, and that's just baloney. Right now, the U.S. government has something like 1,000 military bases in about 150 or 160 different countries.
Yep.
And they call it defense, and then they say we should have a stronger defense. We don't have to worry about any defense. Nobody's attacking us. We're the strongest military power in the world, although we keep losing wars. We lost in Afghanistan, we lost in Iraq, we lost in Vietnam. We keep, for a big power, we lose an awful... I've got to stop that. They lose a lot of wars, but I think the U.S. government, would do a lot better if they pulled all of their troops out of all those 160 countries and adopted sort of the Ron Paul idea. And the reason that 9/11 occurred was blowback. They were in New York City because the U.S. was in their countries. I mean, how would we feel if Brazilians were walking streets in the U.S. with guns and shooting people and raping people? We might get a little miffed at the Brazilians if they did that, or whoever was doing that. Well, people get a little miffed at us and want to, give us a black eye or a bloody nose, and that was what 9/11 was. The U.S. government keeps sticking sticks in the hornet's nest and then wondering why the hornets come and try to bite us, and saying, well, those hornets, they're very bad, they shouldn't bite us. Well, they wouldn't bite us if we didn't mess with them. Those guys aren't attacking Switzerland or Monaco. I mean, the Monacans or the Swiss haven't been involved in imperialist warmongering powers, so they're left free. And if ever those guys try to attack Switzerland or Monaco, they should fight back. But the reality is that the U.S., under the guise of defense, which is really offense, is being the imperialist power of the world, and the U.S. government should stop that.
Hey, real quick, while we're on foreign policy and 9/11, what do you think about the people who say that Dick Cheney had like basically choreographed everything in the background, and it's like the conspiracy theories that are coming out that not coming out, they've been out for a while. The basically say that like Dick Cheney was behind everything, like they knew everything. To me, I see it more as a like these people overseas were just so pissed off for so long at the military. Imagine an Iran coup back in '53 that lasted till '79. That led to the Iranian hostage crisis, right? It's things like this, and then let alone meddling in the foreign, in the Middle East for all these years, the U.S. government, not us, obviously. It just seems to me that it makes perfect sense. Not that I ever trust like the 9/11 Commission report 100%. Right? I don't trust anything the government documents pump out. If they say that the sky's blue and gravity pulls us down, I'll maybe agree to that after I research it. Still, it's just like they have to mix the lies up with all the rest of the truth, so that we're muddled into statism. But the thing is, really, like I don't see it as much as I see it more like the government just completely is horrific at trying to protect people. Has no incentive structure to do quite the opposite, right? It's incentivized just to like basically pick up a bunch of people on its payroll and sit there. They get paid because if they fail, then they get more money, right? So the thing I see is more incompetence. I'm not saying that like Dick Cheney didn't know that or have some report come across the desk that said, hey, there might be an attack on 9/11. I think that they got lots of these reports every day, and that how can you actually take one of these reports, serious, and then one out of the 10,000 reports actually happened. Some people flew some planes into a building, and these people just suck. Government as a whole just cannot protect people. I don't, it just seems like there's too much into like there's explosives in the buildings and stuff. There might have been. I don't know. I don't know the whole story, right? I'm not saying I know it all. I guess what bugs me is when people act like they know every single fact about it. I'm like, no, you don't, most likely. Most people don't really know exactly every single thing that happened on 9/11, right? So my opinion, my question to you is, what do you think about people who put all the blame on like Dick Cheney and George Bush? Not that we like them. Obviously, they're not libertarians. Obviously, they're our enemies. But at the same time, it just seems to me that when people talk about like government's really they got these really smart people involved inside of the system, and they're really smart, and then they choreographed this whole thing with millions of people, and nobody came out as a whistleblower. It's hard for for most of us to really believe that, when really this, to me at least, the scenario is nothing but blowback, like you just said. So what do you say to all those people who say Dick Cheney was behind everything?
Well, I think part of it was incompetence and part of it was venality. I mean, the reason the U.S. got into World War I on the side of the Allies and not the other, we had more bonds, or members, not we, but members of the ruling class had more bonds with Britain than with Germany. And had it been the other way, we would have gone into World War I on the other side.
Right.
So I think it's a combination of venality, where the ruling class wants to these large corporations and military corporations making planes and bombs and stuff. The Export-Import Bank, which supports large corporations. A lot of people think that we libertarians favor crony capitalism. The Pope is always attacking capitalism, or is really attacking crony capitalism, and we would agree that crony capitalism is really fascism. It's not capitalism. So I think that Dick Cheney he might be a bright guy, but he's not all-knowing. Hayek tells us nobody knows everything, and certainly he doesn't. So I think the Vietnam War and the Iraq War and the Afghanistan War were part search for oil and part just hubris.
Okay, I guess this is my point. Don't have a government, and you don't have this problem. Right? People would only they'd have to voluntarily trade with us, and wouldn't be able to do things against our free will with our money stolen against our free will. All this stuff. All right, good stuff. Thanks for answering these tough questions. I really do appreciate that. Let's move on.
I can't hear you anymore. I can't hear you.
What about now?
Now I can hear you.
Okay, might have cut out. All right, so let's go over two last questions before we go today. This one's from Devin Palladino. He wants me to ask you, has any thoughts changed on Bitcoin since you were last on the Voluntary Virtues Network? Is there a chance for Bitcoin to become Austrian? Can things become Austrian?
Well, the issue of my views on Bitcoin haven't changed since I was last on your show, but the issue with Bitcoin is it against the Mengerian idea that money can only come from a previously a valuable commodity, and Bitcoin was not a valuable commodity? And this depends upon how you interpret Menger. If you interpret Menger as saying it has to come from a valuable commodity such as gold or silver, well, then Bitcoin is undermine the Austrian regression theorem. Fine. But if you interpret Menger, I think, more sympathetically and more accurately, he doesn't say it has to be a valuable commodity. It says it has to be something of value. Well, Bitcoin is predicated on solving various equations and mathematical manipulations, and that has value to some people. So I don't think that Bitcoin undermines the Mengerian regression theorem. As to whether it'll be a money, I doubt it, because the government has got more guns than the Bitcoiners, and the government is going to interpret the Bitcoin not as a money but as a commodity, and every time you buy or sell something, they're going to tax you for it. So you can't have a money that every time you pay $1, they take money out. So I think that Bitcoin will not survive as a money if the government wants to stop it, and if the government sees it just as a little pesky fly and ignores it, well, then Bitcoin will limp along as it is now.
Okay, no, fair enough answer. I guess that was my thing too when we're looking at the origins of money, right? We'll go back to Menger. Obviously, I read all that stuff, and when I see it, I do see a ledger system. I guess the PR campaign could be viewed in a negative light, because usually you don't have to have. That's my question, though. People say, well, you don't need a PR campaign for real money like gold, right? My question is, like, back in the day, we don't have historical records of what happened with gold. Somebody had to said one time to somebody else in some language or another, maybe even hieroglyphics, this thing valuable, right? He had to sell the idea that gold was like, or somebody else wanted the gold, right? There was a time when nobody wanted gold. Before maybe it was even discovered, etc. So there had to been. I guess my question is, what constitutes a PR campaign, right? It's a very confusing topic. We don't have enough time to go into it. We'll hopefully have you back on the show. We can go a little bit more in depth on Bitcoin next month. Michael Goodpastor wants me to ask you. He says, ask Walter about forced vaccinations. If a person is spreading a disease, would it be incompatible with the non-aggression principle to forcefully vaccinate them? What if they're not actually infected yet? Could they be forcefully vaccinated preemptively?
That's a very good question. There was this woman, Mary, Typhoid Mary. Typhoid Mary had typhoid, and she was involved in something or other, I don't know, with the public or with people, and she was spreading typhoid. And the question is, should we quarantine her? And she was an innocent person. She didn't even know she had typhoid, and she wasn't purposefully doing this. And I think that we could quarantine her, not put her in prison, but just keep her separate from other people, because in effect she's a murderer, or rather a killer. I mean, she doesn't have mens rea, but once she knows that she has typhoid and she interacts with people, then she's a murderer. You have the same thing with HIV. If you have HIV and you have unprotected sex with a person without telling them, I mean, if you tell them, then that's all right. But if you don't tell them, then in effect you're, well, not a murderer, because HIV is now not a killer, but it's a dread disease. Well, I think a similar thing works with inoculations. But now you have to stipulate that the inoculations actually work and they don't harm people, which is a divisive issue. Some people say they harm people. I would say that if it's stipulated that you can get this disease, and the only way not to get the disease is to get inoculated against it, have a vaccination, then I think that a forced inoculation, unless you're a hermit and you stay way the hell away from everyone else. I mean, polio, let's say you're spreading polio or something like that. this is a very tough question because it sort of seems to violate the non-aggression principle to take an innocent person who hasn't done any crime. See, the problem is that there's this movie where they can predict whether you're going to murder someone or not.
Minority Report.
Right, and
Pre-crime is what they call that.
and
right.
And let's say we know that I'm going to murder someone tomorrow. Well, should they stop me now? My answer to that is very similar to my answer about the what do you call it, that drug, the Godzilla drug. Let's get into drug legalization. Should we legalize heroin? Should we legalize marijuana? Sure.
You mean should the government, not we?
I stand corrected. Should the government legalize it? Yes. But what about the Godzilla drug? What the Godzilla drug is, you take this drug, and then all of a sudden you become a Godzilla and you engage in mass murder. My answer to that is the police should follow anyone. The government should legalize the Godzilla drug, because taking a Godzilla drug is not a per se violation of the non-aggression principle. However, as soon as they start growing fangs or whatever it is that the Godzillas do, this constitutes a threat, and then they should just shoot them. So I would say that if a person doesn't get inoculated and shows the first signs of this disease, they should shoot him, because now he's murder.
I can see that if they're coming around them, like they come to my family's front door and stuff like that. I can see that, but I can't see just shooting them if they stay off, in the distance on some mountaintop in Utah.
No. I said if they're a hermit
gotcha.
If they're a hermit and they don't come near people, and they're not Godzillas. I mean, Godzillas rampage.
Right,
all they have is the HIV or the polio or whatever it is, this disease, and they're on this island, say, and they never get off the island. Well, then leave them alone. On the other hand, if they're in the middle of a city or in the middle of a town and they've got this communicable disease, they're murderers in effect, and then they should be shot. And if you tell people that we're going to shoot you unless you get this vaccination or inoculation, well, then this will encourage them to do it. But again, the issue, I'm speaking only under the assumption that it's dead certainty that this inoculation works. Because there's always dispute. Does the inoculation work or not? Does it work with some people, not other people?
Hey, good.
So that would be my answer to that. That's a very, very good, very, very tough question, because it really pits the non-aggression principle, which is very important to libertarians, with murder, which is also very important to libertarians, that we not have murder. And I think that a person with a communicable disease who's racing around infecting other people is in effect a murderer. And if they know that they're doing this, then it's murder. Otherwise, they're just killing people. But we have to stop killing of innocent people as well.
Yeah, I mean, mens rea really does kick in there too. I think that's really the strongest point of that. No, good stuff. Walter, it's always a pleasure having you on the show here on Voluntary Virtues Network. I'm looking forward to next month. So hopefully I'll have a variety of new questions for you. I'm sure I will. And I want to thank all the viewers out there too. Some really great questions. I try to pick through them as you guys send them in. But usually I can almost ask almost all of them. We just usually run out of time before I can hit all of them up. But Walter, any closing statements from you today? Maybe current events, issues, some topic you'd like to cover before we head out?
Well, no, it's just always a pleasure to be on your show. It's one of the intellectual challenges in my life, and I look forward, and I've agreed to be on every month, and I'm just delighted to know you and to be part of your operation.
Okay,
so
vice
thanks
versa.
for having me again.
Hey, thanks for being on here. We'll talk to you soon, okay, Walter?
Take care.
All right, have a great day.
Bye.
Everyone, thank you guys so much for checking out Voluntary Virtues Network. As you guys know, we always have Walter Block the very first Monday of every month, and I also have Stefan Kinsella, Jeffrey Tucker, David Friedman on the other Mondays. So head over to voluntaryvirtuesnetwork.com. I'm about to put up the brand new schedule in a schedule section. You'll see it at the top of the navigation menus. So that's within the next hour. But also head over to voluntaryvirtues.com, which is my individual website, and hopefully you can give me some support over there. Usually I use Voluntary Virtues Network to help other people cross-promote their channels, their YouTube channels, their websites, etc. So I might as well plug mine while I'm at it as well. Thank you guys so much for your time, and I cannot wait until tomorrow evening when we do have our roundtable session from 8 to 10 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. That is usually our biggest show other than these interviews, so hopefully you guys can come and check us out. And as always, we allow people to be on the panel as well. We take your questions, your viewer input, inquiries, comments, etc., and we try to relay them over into the live video. So thank you guys once again. As you guys know, I will talk to you soon. Have a great day. Bye-bye.